I never thought the day would come when my boss would call me into his office with that smug little smile plastered across his face. He always wore it when he thought he had the upper hand. And that day, I could feel the trap closing even before he opened his mouth. He leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled, eyes sparkling with a kind of cruel delight. "We've reviewed your performance," he began, pausing for effect. "And while you've been adequate, we believe your salary no longer matches your contributions." Adequate. That word cut deeper than any insult. After years of late nights, missed family dinners, and weekends sacrificed to deadlines, all I got was adequate. But before I could even respond, he slid a paper across the desk. My new contract. My salary slashed by 30%. I stared at the numbers, my chest tightening. 30%. Just like that, as if I were nothing more than a line item to erase. I wanted to scream, to slam my fist down, but instead, I let silence stretch between us. Silence makes people nervous, and my boss hated not being in control. His grin widened when he saw my jaw tighten. "Sign it or resign," he said coldly. "But let me assure you, without this job you won't last long." For a moment I let him believe he'd won. I signed the paper with steady hands, meeting his gaze without a flicker of doubt. And as I walked out of his office, the words echoed in my mind like a cruel joke. "You won't last long." What he didn't know was that I had been waiting for this, because buried deep in my original contract, an obscure little clause most people would have missed, was a safeguard I had fought to include years ago. A clause that only activated if my salary was ever reduced without cause. And if that clause was triggered, let's just say it wasn't me who would lose everything. I sat at my desk staring at the paper, my pulse racing. I could almost hear his laughter from behind the walls, smug and certain that he had finally put me in my place. But all he had done was place the noose around his own neck, and I was holding the rope. That night I pulled out my copy of the original agreement. The papers were yellowed at the edges from years of being tucked away, but the words were as sharp as ever. Section 14, subclause 3, any unilateral reduction of salary without just cause shall result in an immediate forfeiture of the managerial position responsible for said reduction. He had signed it. HR had signed it. The CEO had signed it. The only question was, did they even remember? As I read those lines again, a chill ran down my spine. This was bigger than revenge. This was a loaded gun, sitting quietly in my desk drawer all these years, waiting for the moment someone arrogant enough pulled the trigger, and he had just pulled it. But timing was everything. If I moved too soon, I risked them finding a loophole, covering their tracks before the trap could spring. If I waited too long, they might sense something and undo the damage before I could strike. I had to be precise. The next morning, my boss strutted around the office like a king. His voice carried over the cubicles, dripping with arrogance. He made sure everyone knew he'd cut me down, that he had put me in my place. My coworkers avoided my eyes, some pitying me, others relieved it wasn't their turn. But I didn't feel pity. I felt something else entirely. Power, every sneer, every mocking laugh, every casual insult, it all added fuel to the fire that was burning steadily inside me. And with every passing hour, I grew more certain this was going to be his downfall. I called HR later that week, pretending to clarify details about my pay adjustment. My voice was calm, almost curious, like I was confused but not combative. The woman on the other end confirmed everything. "Yes, the reduction is effective immediately," she said cheerfully, unaware that her words were sealing his fate. I thanked her, hung up, and leaned back in my chair. The clause was alive, activated, unstoppable. But here's the thing. This wasn't just about paperwork. This was about leverage, and I knew better than to reveal my hand too early. Instead, I began to gather everything, emails, memos, records of my performance reviews. I wanted a fortress of evidence, something undeniable, because when the trap snapped shut, I wanted there to be no escape. And yet, as I pieced everything together late one night, I realized something chilling. My boss wasn't just arrogant. He was reckless. And reckless men make dangerous mistakes. One mistake in particular would change everything. The following days at the office felt like a storm was gathering, though no one else could sense it. My boss paraded around with a swagger that made even the walls seem smaller, as though his ego took up more space than the furniture. He'd stop by my desk, tapping his knuckles against the edge and say things like, "Don't work too hard. Wouldn't want to waste. Company resources. On someone we've already downsized. His laughter lingered long after he walked away. I smiled politely each time, though inside my chest was a furnace. Every insult, every jab, every smirk only strengthened my resolve. I wasn't just going to teach him a lesson. I was going to make sure his own arrogance dragged him down in front of everyone. But first, I needed allies. I started quietly, testing the waters with a few coworkers who had been bruised by his cruelty in the past. He cut my salary, I whispered one evening when most of the office had cleared out. Did he ever do the same to you? The look in their eyes was enough. Fear, frustration, resignation. They hadn't fought back because they didn't believe they could. That was the kind of grip he had. Power built on intimidation, not respect. One woman leaned in close, her voice trembling. He threatened to fire me last year if I even asked about a raise. Said he could replace me in a week. Another man shook his head. He cut my bonus in half without a word. When I confronted him, he told me to quit if I didn't like it. Every story was another piece of ammunition, another nail in the coffin he had built for himself. But then came something I hadn't expected. Late one night, as I was packing up, a younger employee slipped a folded piece of paper onto my desk. She didn't say a word, just nodded once before hurrying away. When I opened it, my breath caught in my throat. It was a printed email, an internal memo from my boss to the HR director. The words were sharp, dripping with disdain. Slash his pay. I want him crawling. If he quits, good riddance. If he stays, I want him broken. I stared at the paper, my pulse thundering in my ears. It wasn't just arrogance. It was premeditated humiliation. He wanted to destroy me, not just financially, but personally. That changed everything. The clause in my contract wasn't just about salary. It was about justice. And now I had the smoking gun that would make the entire company see exactly what kind of man he truly was. But I wasn't ready to pull the trigger yet. No, I wanted him to squirm. The next morning, I walked into the office with a calmness that unnerved even me. He was waiting by my desk, arms folded, lips curled into that familiar smirk. Still here? I figured you'd be gone by now. Guess desperation makes people cling to scraps. I simply looked at him, meeting his gaze with quiet defiance. I'm not going anywhere, I said evenly. For the first time, his smirk faltered, just slightly. He wasn't used to resistance. He thrived on fear, on submission. But I had no fear left to give him. Only patience and a ticking clock. That weekend, I sat at my kitchen table. The contract spread out before me, the memo beside it. Every piece of evidence lined up like dominoes, ready to fall. My hands trembled, not with fear but with anticipation. I could end him with a single email to the board. But something in me hesitated. Not because I doubted the clause. Not because I feared retaliation. No. What held me back was the certainty that he had more secrets. And if I played my cards right, I could uncover them all before delivering the final blow. And I was right. Because just as I was preparing to make my move, I stumbled onto something far more dangerous. Something that could destroy not only his career, but his entire life. That night, long after the office lights went dark, I sat hunched over my laptop, chasing a thread I wasn't even sure existed. I wasn't looking for anything more than proof to back my claws. But what I found was far bigger. Hidden in a folder buried behind outdated reports was a ledger. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Rows of numbers, expense codes, dates. But the deeper I read, the more wrong it felt. Money wasn't moving where it should. Payments were being routed through companies I'd never heard of. Offshore accounts were swallowing thousands, sometimes millions, then disappearing into nothing. And yet every transaction had been signed off by my boss. My chest tightened. He wasn't just cruel, he was stealing. Suddenly, his smug smile the day he cut my salary made sense. He wanted me weakened, humiliated, and silenced before I could stumble across this. The pay cut wasn't just punishment, it was camouflage. If I looked like a desperate, defeated employee, no one would believe me when I exposed him. I stared at the screen, pulse hammering. I had uncovered the kind of secret that could burn entire careers to ash. And I knew one thing. If he realized I had this ledger, he wouldn't hesitate to destroy me. So I began to collect. Screenshots, PDFs, audio recordings of his careless remarks. Every shred of evidence went into hidden drives, stashed in places no one could find. I created backups of backups. If he came after me, I wanted the truth to survive. But I couldn't fight him alone. Not in a company this size. Not against someone this entrenched. I needed someone who lived and breathed rules. Someone too rigid to bend under pressure. That's when I thought of the internal auditor. a quiet man most people ignored. But who had the authority to force an audit if he had proof? I waited until late one evening and found him outside, cigarette in hand. I offered him another, watched the smoke curl between us, then slipped him a single spreadsheet. His eyes scanned it, and I watched the color drain from his face. This isn't a mistake," he whispered. "This is deliberate. I can file an audit request, but you need to understand. Once I do, he'll know. If he suspects, he'll erase everything before the board even sees it." Erase. The word stuck like a knife. If I moved too quickly, the ledger could vanish. If I hesitated, he might find me out. The margin for error was razor thin. That night, as I weighed my options, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I opened it and froze. It was a photo of the ledger's first page. The caption, "We know." My blood ran cold. Someone was watching me. Someone already knew what I had. The room seemed to shrink around me. For the first time, I realized the trap I was building might not just catch him. It could catch me too. After that message, sleep became a stranger. Every shadow outside my window felt like an eye watching me. Every email, every phone call seemed touched by unseen hands. I deleted the text, but it didn't matter. Whoever had sent it already knew too much. At work, my boss carried himself like a king drunk on his own power. He barked orders, mocked employees, strutted down hallways as if he owned the air we breathed. To everyone else, it was the same old routine. But to me, his arrogance looked like cracks spreading across glass. He didn't know how close he was to shattering. I avoided the auditor for days, terrified that whoever had texted me might be tracking him too. Instead, I played my role perfectly, quiet, obedient, the humiliated worker he thought he'd broken. I let him think I was crawling. I let him believe I had accepted my place. But behind that mask, I was sharpening the knife. Every night, I pieced the evidence tighter together. I mapped the ledger against company budgets, tied it to his signed approvals, and linked it to fake vendors that didn't exist anywhere except in his imagination. I had enough to trigger the clause, enough to ruin him, but enough wasn't the goal. I wanted inevitability, and then, as if fate agreed with me, he made the mistake I'd been waiting for. On a Thursday morning meeting, with half the department in attendance, he bragged about how resources had to be cut and mocked me directly. "Some people should be grateful they even have a job," he said, smirking, especially when their work barely pays for itself. Laughter rippled through the room, forced and uneasy. I didn't laugh. I simply stared at him. And in that moment, in front of witnesses, he admitted to cutting my salary without just cause. He admitted it publicly. The clause was no longer a silent weapon hidden in paperwork. It was awake, alive, irrefutable. That night, I met with the auditor in secret. His voice shook as he spoke. "If we trigger this now, the board will be forced to investigate. But we have to be ready. If they realize you have the ledger, they'll do everything to bury it." I nodded, sliding the memo across the table, the one where my boss had written, "I want him crawling." The auditor's hands trembled as he read it. "This combined with the contract clause?" "He's finished." For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a small smile. The walls he'd built around himself were crumbling, and soon everyone would see the rot inside. But even as I savored that thought, my phone buzzed again. Same unknown number, this time no photo. Just 4 words, "You're moving too slow." The message hit me harder than the first. Whoever was watching wasn't just observing anymore. They were pushing me, urging me, maybe even controlling the timeline. And that's when the real fear sank in. What if this wasn't just my revenge? What if someone else wanted him destroyed and I was just the pawn carrying out their plan? The night after that second message, the city felt different. The air was heavy, like a room waiting for someone to speak a terrible secret aloud. I sat by my window, the phone still in my hand, wondering who had me under their thumb. Was it someone inside the company, another victim of my boss, or someone who wanted him gone for their own reasons? Either way, the clock had run out. If I waited any longer, I'd lose the chance to control the narrative. So I called the auditor. We met at a forgotten diner on the edge of town. A place so quiet our whispers felt like shouts. He laid out the plan one last time. We would file the audit request at exactly 9 a.m. Friday. By policy, the board had to acknowledge it within 24 hours. We would attach my contract clause, the memo, and one carefully chosen excerpt from the ledger. Enough to make them panic, but not enough for them to erase the rest. "Once the board sees this," the auditor said, his voice low and tight, "they'll have no choice. They'll suspend him pending investigation. That triggers the clause automatically. He loses his position. Instantly, I nodded. My hands were steady, but my stomach churned. And the rest of the ledger? We hold it back until we're sure it can't be buried. It was a perfect plan. But perfect plans rarely survive first contact. Friday morning, the office buzzed with routine. Phones ringing, keyboards clattering, the hum of people pretending nothing was wrong. I sat at my desk at 8:59 a.m., cursor hovering over the send button. My boss was in his office, door closed, probably plotting his next humiliation. At 9:00 a.m. exactly, I clicked. The audit request flew through the system like a spark through dry leaves. By 9:02, the board's inboxes were on fire. By 9:05, I received an automated confirmation. By 9:10, the auditor texted me one word: done. I leaned back in my chair, heart hammering. The trigger had been pulled. Then at 9:15, everything changed. The office door slammed open. My boss strode out, his face pale but burning with rage. He didn't look at anyone as he stormed past the cubicles. But when he reached my desk, he stopped dead. His eyes bored into mine, cold and sharp as glass. "What did you do?" he hissed. I said nothing. The silence stretched. He leaned in closer, voice low enough for only me to hear. "You think you're clever? You think I don't know exactly what you're trying?" I forced myself to hold his gaze to show no fear. But inside, a question clawed at me. How did he know? The audit request should have blindsided him. He straightened, sneering. "This isn't over." Then he turned and walked back into his office, slamming the door behind him. My phone buzzed again. Same number. This time the message was only 3 words. "He's on to you." I felt the room tilt, my vision narrowing to a tunnel. Whoever this ghost was, they knew things only the auditor and I should know. I typed back for the first time. "Who are you?" No reply. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. Around me, the office moved like nothing had changed, but everything had. The trap was set. But now it felt like there were traps inside the trap. Traps I hadn't seen. Traps meant for me. By the afternoon, the office felt like a waiting room before a storm. Phones rang less, voices grew hushed, and every so often a ripple of whispers ran across the floor like static. Everyone sensed something was wrong, but no one dared name it. At exactly 2:00 p.m., an email hit the company-wide inbox. It was short, almost sterile. Effective immediately, the board has initiated an internal review regarding financial compliance. Employees are expected to cooperate fully. Department heads will be notified of next steps. That was it. No names. No details. But everyone knew. I caught sight of my boss through the glass of his office. He sat stiffly at his desk, jaw clenched, eyes glued to his monitor. His hand kept tapping the desk fast, sharp taps that echoed faintly through the room. He hadn't moved in nearly an hour. Then suddenly his phone lit up. He snatched it, barked a few words I couldn't hear, then slammed it down. Moments later, he burst out of his office. "Meeting room. Now," he snapped. His eyes swept the floor, daring anyone to hesitate. We filed in quietly, every step heavy. Inside, he paced like a caged animal. His voice cut the air like a blade. "Someone here thinks they can destroy me. Someone thinks they're clever enough to twist numbers, contracts, and clauses. Let me make this clear. If I go down, I'm not going alone." No one spoke. No one even breathed. Then his eyes landed on me. Just for a second, long enough to make my stomach drop. I lowered my gaze, but the damage was done. The others noticed. Whispers would follow. The meeting ended with no answers, only fear. When we filed out, I caught a few glances, suspicion, curiosity, maybe even pity. The ground beneath me was starting to crumble. Back at my desk, my phone buzzed again. Same number. "He's starting to break. Don't stop now." This time I didn't hesitate. I typed back, fingers trembling. "Why are you helping me?" "What do you want?" A pause. Then, "Want justice. And maybe revenge." I froze. Revenge. For a moment, I wondered if this was a trap. If I was being used. If the mysterious ally had a grudge so deep they didn't care who burned in the crossfire. At 5 p.m., another email arrived. This one private, just for me. From the board. A formal notice. They had suspended my boss pending the outcome of the audit. The clause in my contract triggered instantly. My salary, my lost wages, every penalty they had tried to force on me. It all flipped back in my favor. And more than that, the clause extended. Any proven misconduct by a superior would void their authority over me completely. In other words, he was finished. But victory didn't feel clean. Not yet. Because as I read the notice, another message appeared on my phone. "This is only the beginning. He's hiding more than you think. And if you stop now, you'll never know the truth." I stared at those words until the office blurred. My boss had lost his power, but somehow it didn't feel like enough. And the worst part? Whoever was feeding me these secrets, they weren't done with me either. That night the city didn't sleep, and neither did I. I walked the streets aimlessly, phone in hand, waiting for another message. The suspension should have been enough. The clause had done its work. But deep inside I felt the unease of unfinished business. The neon lights of shuttered shops glared back at me like watchful eyes. My footsteps echoed off empty sidewalks, each one reminding me that silence wasn't safety. It was a warning. I kept glancing at my phone, expecting that familiar buzz, but for the first time in days, nothing came. The quiet was worse than the threats. By the time I reached the edge of the city, the old train station loomed in the distance, rusted and forgotten. It wasn't just coincidence. Something in my chest pulled me there, like I already knew the answer waited in its shadows. I stepped through the broken gates, the air thick with dust and memory. My phone lit up as if on cue. "You came. Good. Platform 3. My hands trembled, but I moved forward. Each step rang hollow on the cracked tiles, and for a moment, I wondered if the entire building was holding its breath with me. At the far end of the platform, a figure stood in the dark. A woman. She didn't move until I was close enough to hear the hitch in her breathing. "You don't know me," she said, her voice low, trembling, but sharp. "But I know him. I know what he did." My mouth went dry. "Who are you?" She stepped closer, the dim light revealing her face. Tired, worn but burning with something fierce. She pulled a leather folder from her bag and pressed it into my hands. Inside were copies of documents, signed letters, ledgers, evidence of a rot far deeper than I'd ever imagined. Cover-ups, silent payoffs, careers destroyed to protect his throne. Her voice cracked as she spoke again. "He ruined me. My work, my name. He thought I'd stay buried. But I kept the proof. I waited for the right moment. And then I saw you. I saw what he did to you." The weight of her words hit harder than the folder itself. My fight for dignity had been just one thread in a web of destruction. "You used me," I whispered, though the words sounded weaker than I intended. Her eyes didn't flinch. "No, I gave you the fire. You chose to light it." Silence fell between us, heavy and suffocating. The folder burned in my grip. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about truth. And if I delivered it to the board tomorrow, there would be no coming back. She stepped back into the shadows, her voice fading. "They'll suspend him, yes, but this will end him. Entirely. And your claws will do the rest. You'll rise where he falls. The only question is, do you have the courage to finish it?" Before I could answer, she was gone, swallowed by the darkness of the station. I stood there for a long time, alone with the folder and the sound of the wind whistling through broken glass. My phone buzzed once more, a final push. Finish it. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if the voice in those messages belonged to her, or to the part of myself that had already made the decision. The city was still awake when I walked back home. But now, it wasn't the city's restless energy I felt. It was mine. Tomorrow the board would meet. Tomorrow the truth would rise. Tomorrow someone's empire would crumble. I just didn't know yet if I'd survive the collapse. Morning came, but the weight of the night followed me into the daylight. The folder sat on my desk like a loaded weapon. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I only waited for the hour to arrive. The board meeting was scheduled for 11. By then, one life would be shattered, and another, mine, would be rewritten. When I arrived at the office, the air felt sharp, electric, like a storm pressed against the glass walls. Whispers died as I walked past. Faces turned, watching, curious, afraid. They didn't know what I carried, but they could sense it. Something final, something heavy. At exactly 11, I was called into the boardroom. The doors closed behind me with a sound that echoed like judgment. 12 faces stared across the polished table, cold and unreadable. The chairman leaned forward, fingers interlaced. "We've seen the audit, but we understand you may have more to provide. Do you?" I set the folder down. For a heartbeat, my hand hovered over it. Once I opened it, there was no turning back. Then, with a single motion, I slid it across the table. They opened it in silence. Page after page, ledger after ledger, memos signed in his unmistakable hand. Cover-ups. Payoffs. Quiet. Firings buried under numbers. Each turn of the page felt like a hammer on a coffin. The silence grew unbearable. Finally, the chairman exhaled sharply, his voice low but firm. "This isn't suspension material. This is termination, effective immediately." The words didn't just end a career, they erased an empire. By noon, the announcement was official. My boss was stripped of his title, his office, his authority. His name removed from company directories like it had never belonged there. Accounts frozen. Benefits revoked. His legacy scorched clean in the light of truth. I watched as security walked him out. His face was pale, eyes hollow, but burning with something darker, hate. He didn't fight. He didn't shout. He just turned his gaze on me, unblinking, as though carving my image into memory. A silent promise. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't expected. Fear. Because victories like this don't come without enemies. That evening, the office buzzed with chaos. Some cheered quietly, relieved to see him gone. Others whispered about me, the one who had brought the fire. Some avoided me altogether, as if touching me might burn them too. When I finally left, night had already fallen. The streets were slick with rain, glowing under streetlights. My phone buzzed as I walked. The same number, the same ghost. "You did it. He's finished. And now so are you. Free." I stopped walking, staring at the screen. My reflection shimmered in the rain-slick glass of a storefront. But I hardly recognized myself. I typed back, "Who are you really? Why help me?" The reply came slower this time, as though the ghost on the other end hesitated. Because he destroyed me too. Because no one believed me. Because I waited years for someone strong enough to drag him into the light. You were that person. My hands tightened around the phone. The truth was both comforting and suffocating. I hadn't been chosen because of who I was, but because I was convenient. The perfect weapon. I typed back one last time. "And what happens now?" The answer chilled me. "Now you live with it. Just like I have. Don't look for me again." The line went silent. I stood there in the rain, staring at the city lights, feeling both victorious and haunted. I had everything I'd fought for. My position, my salary restored, my dignity reclaimed, yet it all felt hollow, like the echo of a victory that belonged more to ghosts than to me. And in the silence, one thought carved itself into me, deeper than any contract clause or boardroom decree. Secrets don't die, they only change hands. I walked into the night with the folder still heavy in my bag, knowing the war was over, but the shadow of it would never leave me. This is Karma Unfolded, where every secret finds its reckoning. Don't forget to subscribe.